day 156 of the war in Gaza, and amid growing international pressure for a ceasefire, the IDF continues to confront pockets of Hamas resistance while deepening attacks in and around Khan Yunis and Rafah. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
During the course of the weekend, the IDF continued confronting and eliminating Hamas operatives wherever necessary. In Khan Yunis, IDF troops killed at least 20 terrorists in close-quarter encounters and aerial strikes. In Hamad, IDF troops operated on several terror infrastructures, apprehended terrorists, eliminated a terrorist cell, and located explosive devices and weapons. In central Gaza, IDF troops killed at least 10 terrorists and hit a terrorist cell and struck launch sites that were used to attack Sderot. And there were attacks in densely inhabited Rafah. The army struck the Al-Masri Tower in the Hamad neighborhood of Rafah after warning the 300 residents to evacuate 30 minutes before the airstrike. Hamas operatives had been using the civilians in the building as human shields to prevent an Israeli attack. There were no reports of civilian casualties. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the Israeli military will continue to operate against Hamas in all of the Gaza Strip, including in Rafah, Hamas's final stronghold. Netanyahu confirmed intense international pressure, but insisted that Rafah had to be taken for the war to be won.
צה"ל ימשיך לפעול מול כל גדודי החמאס בכל רחבי הרצועה, וזה כולל את רפיח, המעוז האחרון של החמאס. מי שאומר לנו לא לפעול ברפיח, אומר לנו להפסיד במלחמה, וזה לא יקרה.
While fighting the war, Israel is also deeply involved in facilitating humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians. Israel is now closely cooperating with the new efforts to shuttle humanitarian aid to Gaza from the port of Larnaca in Cyprus. The European Commission said the maritime aid corridor was part of accelerating Western efforts to relieve the humanitarian crisis in the war-ravaged enclave. Israel is also facilitating the growing number of international airdrops of aid to locations along the Gaza coast. Over the weekend, at least one parachute failed to open. 5 Palestinians were killed and several wounded when boxes of aid dropped by U.S. planes fell on them by mistake in northwest Gaza. The aid is continuing even as time ran out for a ceasefire to reach an agreement on a proposed 6-week truce that mediators had hoped would be in place by Ramadan, which is due to begin today.
An mediated hostage deal for an extended pause in Gaza fighting failed to materialize ahead of the Ramadan holiday due to begin today. Both the Mossad and U.S. Secretary of State, let's do that again. I was ready to forge on. Yeah. And a mediated hostage deal for an extended pause in Gaza fighting failed to materialize ahead of the Ramadan holiday. Both the Mossad and U.S. Secretary of State Blinken blamed Hamas. More on this from ILTV's Devo Klein.
A rare Mossad statement said that the agreement to release Israeli hostages in exchange for an extended pause in Gaza fighting did not come together because Hamas wants to ignite the region on Ramadan more than it wants an agreement. Mossad chief David Barnea led the Israeli delegation in rounds of mediated talks in Paris, Doha, and Cairo that included the head of the CIA. The Mossad statement read, "At this stage, Hamas is holding to its position as if it was uninterested in a deal and is striving to ignite the region during Ramadan at the expense of the Palestinian residents in the Gaza Strip." U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also blamed Hamas for the absence of a deal.
The issue is Hamas. The issue is whether Hamas will decide or not to have a ceasefire that would benefit everyone. The ball is in their court. We're working intensely on it, and we'll see what they do. But there's no doubt in my mind that getting to this ceasefire with the release of hostages would be a profound benefit to everyone involved.
Israeli media reports say that some families of hostages taken by Hamas have received signs of life from their loved ones held for 156 days. The IDF censor prevented further details from being published at this stage. The IDF had previously announced that 33 of the remaining 134 had been killed in captivity. Thousands gathered once again in Tel Aviv to bring attention to the plight of the hostages still held in Gaza. Family members of those held in captivity were joined by hostages released in November. Coming shortly after the UN report on Hamas sexual assaults and International Women's Day, this week's rally put a special emphasis on the women still held in Gaza.
We have here, like every Saturday, we have a rally. This weekend is dedicated to the women that are still in captivity, 19 women that are still there. Even though all the agreement that we had that the women were supposed to be released, they were not released. But it's them and all the others, still 134 people that are not here, and we are waiting for them to come.
And joining us now with more on the Gaza war on day 156 is Luth VaselMande, former member of Knesset and deputy ambassador of the Israeli embassy in Cairo and a research fellow at the Mizgav Institute for National Security. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Ramadan is beginning today, and as of this interview, there is no hostage deal as Hamas is refusing to release any hostages. So where does this leave Israel and the IDF? Will Israel have no choice now but to move into Rafah?
So first of all, the Rafah session of the war is key. And Israel cannot allow itself not to go into Rafah at some point because the air that the Hamas is receiving, or rather the opportunity to either hide, manufacture or remanufacture its arms, or smuggle them from the Philadelphia line, from the ground, from Egypt. Some of these things did happen during the time when the IDF was not in the Strip. All of those things can still happen. And whilst they can still happen, that means that the Hamas may have the needed air, the ammunition, and the capability that they need to, again, regain their strength and to take control over Gaza. And this is something that the IDF simply cannot allow, just for the fact that that would mean that the 7th of October can happen again. And again, just like the Hamas says clearly that it will. And therefore, going into the Rafah part of Gaza is not a question. This is a must. What the Hamas wants is for the IDF to do that in Ramadan. That's why it's not moving forward with a hostage deal. It's not helping in any way to make this process culminate in any manner, because it wants Israel to be dragged into this kind of escalation, specifically in Ramadan, and that would recruit the support of Muslims worldwide, but more particularly in the West Bank, in the north, in Lebanon, and within Israel itself, which is something that the IDF and Israel should not fall into.
And yet, there is also intense international pressure for Israel not to operate in Rafah. U.S. President Biden even said it was a red line. But yet, as you said, Israel has no choice but to operate in Rafah at some point. So how does it do this and still appease its Western allies?
This is a very difficult situation because I would not speak about appeasing Western allies, but the United States is something different. Israel and the United States have a strategic relationship. There is a kind of a symbiosis that is very important and key in the geostrategic security concept of Israel to begin with, and therefore Israel has to take into account what the American administration is asking on the one hand. On the other hand, as I said, the only, or I would say the foremost responsibility of any democratically elected government, whether it's in Israel or any other place on the face of the planet, is to make sure that their citizens are safe, that they are not massacred, burnt, raped, killed, and so on. And this is something that, if any leader takes 1 minute to think about, this is the first and foremost responsibility of any government to its own citizens. Without taking care of Rafah, the Israeli government cannot give this or make true its own promise, its own responsibility to its own citizens. And therefore, it is in a very difficult place. I believe that there is no other way other than to take care of the enemy. And I'm not talking about the Palestinian population as a whole, but rather the Hamas, which is a very difficult thing to do because they entrench themselves amidst the civilian population on purpose because they don't care about their own people. In schools, they wear civilian clothing. They try to make the IDF hurt as many civilians as possible in order to increase the international pressure on Israel. And yet, the IDF will have to do so in order to make away with this very significant threat.
I also want to ask, if there is no deal now ahead of Ramadan, despite all the pressure exerted by the United States, by Qatar, by Egypt, what does this ultimately mean for the hostages?
Almost an impossible situation, very, very difficult, very heartbreaking, and inhumane on the part of the Hamas. The Hamas knows this very well, as opposed to the United States that has no negotiation with terrorist policy, with Russia that also has the same policy, with many other countries. Israel is extremely sensitive to every single life. And it has a responsibility, the government, to bring those people back, hopefully alive. We know that some of the hostages are not alive. And inhumanely, the Hamas is not giving out this very basic information, not to mention other things. So this is a very difficult situation. And I certainly do not envy those who need to make a choice.
All right, well, let's hope Israel will be able to bring the hostages back home soon. Luth VaselMande, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you very much.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And the Biden administration has announced its intent to build a pier off the coast of Gaza to provide some 2 million meals daily. This as the U.S. president has also been publicly criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu over Israel's war policy. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The U.S. says it will build a pier off the coast of Gaza to eventually provide some 2 million meals daily for civilians. The Pentagon said that 1,000 soldiers will be involved in the project, and it will take 2 months to build. Senior administration officials briefing reporters said the U.S. military personnel would be operating in vessels along the shore, although they won't be docking.
Simply put, they'll establish a temporary offshore maritime pier that allows for shipping vessels to transfer cargo to smaller vessels to transport and offload cargo to a temporary causeway for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Israel is cooperating with the effort.
אנחנו מתאמים הקמה של מזח צף ימי זמני, שנועד להכניס סיוע הומניטרי לעזה לאחר בידוק ישראלי מלא. המשימה הזאת היא משימה ברורה בשיתוף פעולה בין צה"ל בתיאום מלא לפיקוד המרכז האמריקאי. אנחנו נפיץ את הציוד באמצעות ארגונים בינלאומיים לאוכלוסייה הזקוקה לכך.
President Biden made the announcement about the pier during his State of the Union address.
I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day.
Meanwhile, in an interview on MSNBC, President Biden had harsh words for Prime Minister Netanyahu. The interview came after Biden was overheard saying that he and Prime Minister Netanyahu were headed toward a come to Jesus meeting, an American expression for having a blunt conversation over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He explained it this way.
What's happening is he has a right to defend Israel, a right to continue to pursue Hamas, but he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken.
Biden said planning must be done for post-war Gaza and said there were red lines Israel should not cross.
I've spoken with the majority of the Arab leaders from Saudi Arabia to Egypt to Jordan. They're all prepared to fully recognize Israel and begin to rebuild the region. And that's the focus. What comes after Gaza? What's next? It's a tough decision, but there's a lot that can be done.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you have a red line? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do, would that be a red line?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical, so there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have, but there's red lines that if he crosses, he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead.
Biden said he would consider a visit to the Knesset to speak directly to the Israeli people.
Address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Is that something you would do?
Yes.
Would that have to be at the invitation of the Prime Minister, or could that be at the invitation of the President?
I'd rather not discuss it more.
While tensions seem to be growing between Washington and Jerusalem, U.S. President Joe Biden last week gave the State of the Union address in which he once again reiterated U.S. support for Israel. On hand at the speech were also released hostages who sought to raise awareness of the remaining 134 hostages still in captivity. And joining us now is Jewish American activist Emily Austin, who was also in attendance at the event. Emily, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me today.
So you were there at the State of the Union. Let's talk about the speech itself. I mean, what did you make of Biden's speech?
For the most part, I was very upset. It's not a secret that America is very divided right now. We're very polarized. Sitting above him, I didn't have the best hearing of what he was saying, but based on the audience's reaction, you can tell he said something against the Republicans when all the Democrats would stand up, and then vice versa. The Republicans only stood when he said, okay, I'm almost done. And the polarization was deeply upsetting. And then also right next to me was Mia Shem and her mother, her mother was in tears the whole time and quite honestly distracted me because I couldn't stop crying watching her cry. So my attention was diverted between trying to listen to Biden and then watching Mia's mother and just having my heart broken.
And I mean, you were also there to highlight the plight of the hostages, the fact that there are still 134 hostages being held by Hamas. You wore a big yellow ribbon on your dress. Was there really a sense that this issue was on the agenda and on the minds of the members of Congress and of President Biden?
The members of Congress, yes. Right before the State of the Union address began, there was a cocktail reception. All of the hostage families were in the presence. They were speaking with congressmen, senators, the Speaker of the House. They all wore yellow scarves to represent that they were the families of the hostages. So it would be very hard for me to believe that all of the attention or a lot of it was not on the families. However, I was personally disappointed because I feel as if the topic of Israel itself, and specifically the hostage families, was breezed over. And then you hear how emphasized the war on Russia and Ukraine was, that almost makes it feel like it was neglected when they spoke so little about Israel. So I was very disappointed because having so many families in attendance, they're waiting to hear what he's going to say about them, whether he's going to reaffirm a plan to get the hostages back, and he didn't.
And I mean, you said that you were sitting next to Mia Shem, one of the released hostages, and you said her mother was crying throughout. I mean, what can you tell us about that? Why was she crying?
I'm sure it was emotional to see so many families in the balcony. Of course, I can't speak on her behalf, but there are so many families suffering the same fate that she did. Now, Mia was one of the lucky ones to get to return home, but I'm sure being there in the presence of so many families who are suffering as well can't be easy on a mother. I'm not even a mother, and I can't imagine if something like that happened to me one day. And I think it was just an emotional scene. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if she was upset by the fact that it was very much breezed over. I think it was just, an overwhelming room. There was an overwhelming amount of support, not only from the people who attended, from the congressman, but overall, it was a very emotional night. I mean, personally, I was choked up beginning to end. I couldn't even speak.
And you said there was a lot of support, but we also saw many anti-Israel voices in the crowd, most notably the Squad. I mean, how notable was their presence during this event?
Being completely honest, their presence was unseen and unheard. There was so much support amongst, like I said, the congressmen for the hostages to return home. There were congressmen with the sticker counting how many days there were remaining, how many days that the hostages are in Gaza. There was a full crowd standing ovation. I did not see the Squad specifically, so I can't confirm or deny that they stood, but almost the entire audience stood up when Biden did address his short mention of the hostages. So I did not feel or see their presence. I think that the State of the Union deliberately didn't address a lot of important matters, and therefore it was just kind of all over the place. So I didn't feel the Squad's presence, the Hamas caucus's presence.
All right, well, that's unfortunate. Emily Austin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
I appreciate it.
And moving on, Israel's Minister for the Advancement of Women's Rights, Mai Golan, is leading an official delegation of Israeli women to the United Nations to mark International Women's Day. Golan is set to speak on Monday and address Hamas's systemic rape and sexual violence against Israeli women and the hostages. She will also be present at the UN Security Council meeting requested by the US, the UK, and France to discuss the sexual atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Last week, the UN released a report confirming that Hamas has committed mass rape on October 7th, 5 months after the fact. Israel has accused the UN of seeking to downplay the findings of the report. Ahead of the meeting, Golan said she intends to represent all Israeli women alongside representatives of the world's countries and hopes to ensure that the silenced voices of Israeli and Jewish women who were raped, slaughtered, and kidnapped are heard. And moving on, a pro-Palestinian activist has destroyed an historic painting at Cambridge University in the UK in an act of protest. A video posted on social media by the Palestine Action Protest Group showed the woman spraying red paint all over a portrait of British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour, who was the UK Foreign Minister in 1917. She then proceeds to slash the painting with a knife. In a caption accompanying the clip, the group said it blamed the foreign minister for his Balfour Declaration as the reason the Palestinians lost their homeland to Israel. The Balfour Declaration expressed the British government's recognition of and support for the right of the Jewish people for self-determination in their historical homeland, the land of Israel. The university issued a statement saying it regrets the damage caused and said support was available for any member of the college community affected. Not sure exactly how defacing an historical painting will help the Palestinian cause, but hopefully the perpetrators will be arrested and investigated accordingly. And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies and warm temperatures set to reach highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 69 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm the Darga Velazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.